Um, as we know, algorithms and social media have been identified as two of the major modalities of social influence shaping public opinion in the last decade. And recently in 2019, there has been an international forum on AI and futures of education, which was co-organized by UNESCO. And they had specific focus on defining the competence required in the AI era. The forum emphasized the importance of AI literacy, data literacy, and algorithm literacy. So Sunčica, can you tell us your opinion? Why is it important to have knowledge and understanding about AI systems?
Well, Maya, thank you first for introducing me and including me on all this. This is a very interesting topic for me because I, like Maya said, I approach this from a point of art. And I think it's very important to approach this from different professions. And knowing about AI systems help us really to understand and be more critical towards the technology. Like it enables our creative thinking, it enable us to question the status quo and work towards the creation and development of the technology that we can actually create so that it actually includes our well-being, but also the planetary well-being, because this technology that we're talking about, it's not just about human-centric point of view. It actually is quite embedded in the environment and the natural world. So in order to kind of work our way to develop it in a more, let's say, humane way and planetary well-being way, we do need to understand the process behind it. And AI technologies today have a very much more, a lot of impact because as technology that kind of affects everyone around the globe, but it also connects everyone around the globe. It has a lot of impact on fostering and developing the current political currents, creating economical development or economical divide. Also does have a lot of effects on our social behavior. So it's very imperative for us to understand the infrastructures actually that holds together the AI, what is behind the AI itself. But also it's very important to demystify the conceptualization of AI. And it's very nice that you introduced us to this group thinking at first. I'm interested to see the results afterwards, because today the mass media puts this kind of certain kind of image and hype around AI. And the AI now is pretty much used as a certain umbrella of all different types of technology, such as deep learning, neural networks, and machine learning. But they are all quite different. And in order to really do understand all of them, when we understand all of them, then we are actually able to be like, okay, this doesn't really work. There are some certain things that maybe I do as a consumer do not really like how this is being developed, because this technology is not just being developed by companies, it's also developed by us consumers. Like if you see the Facebook or Google company, they've been developed by individuals that later on became corporations. So they came as individuals, as consumers, to create a certain technology. So us being knowledgeable about these systems can actually help us develop it further on, to think about the future that we all actually want to create for all of us. And this is also kind of a bit of tricky, because AI technologies now are really, really accelerating, and we are implementing them very, very fast. So we have kind of very little time also to reflect on them. And I think it's very important to reflect on them, to kind of be able to pause and be like, okay, have a review mirror, as McLuhan says. Because right now, as this technology is developing, of course that we're gonna, in the process of development, make mistakes. We're gonna encounter ethical issues, as we did right now, the racial bias, the environmental issue around it as well. So we can't really expect to completely minimize these effects. I mean, when you try to learn about something and develop it, you have to make certain mistakes. So right now we are having these ad hoc types of policy regulations, government around AI, but we also now need to think more about revisiting those regulations. And in order to do that, we do really need to have like education around this. So AI literacy, for me, it's not only about what AI is and how it functions, it also should be more about all other types of disciplines and thinking methodologies that come into its development. So we can actually create this sort of like a fresh eye set to be more aware of it in order to kind of give our voice to its development.
Thank you, Sunčica. So you emphasized several times, you mentioned that it's important that education plays a major role, and that it is important to pause and to reflect about development of AI. You mentioned that also that it is important to demystify, and as we see from the first activity, majority of us still have an image of AI being as a robot. Like you often mention that we imagine artificial intelligence being as from the movie Terminator. So I would like together in 2021 with other colleagues, Ana Popović, Isidora Pejević-Blagović, Aleksandar Bulajić, who is here with us today, you and I, we developed one game which aim is to actually demystify our relationship with artificial intelligence. Can you tell us more about the game, how it can be used as adult education tool, how it can help us to navigate through these complex questions?
Well, first, for me, the education around AI is a lot about the education between cross-disciplinary. It's a cross-disciplinary collaboration, you know. And for us in Ivy, it was pretty much that. Like, we came from different disciplines, from science and art, and we tried to think together and learn from each other. But we also tried to unlearn in certain kind of thoughts and thinking about AI. And I think this is the way forward, actually, in AI education, but also in developing AI. And we try to kind of embed that in our game. So the way how we perceive the game is the way, for example, the title itself, it's AI through V. So basically we translated artificial intelligence in Serbian, veštačka inteligencija, but VI, it's also a word in Serbian, which means you. And for us, it was very interesting to kind of play with this symbolic meaning that AI is you, you are AI, in terms of we wanted to make players to be more aware of the AI. So that was kind of the goal, kind of like educational moment in the game. The whole game was set up through these dialogues that take you to all different kinds of locations throughout the city, Belgrade city, where you encounter specific areas that we pinpoint as problematic areas, like ethical issues, economical issues, money transaction, environmental issues, a lot of interesting stuff. But in most cases, for us, the way how I perceived it, at least, and both of you can correct me, is that the education around this game was pretty much to make an awareness of the player. Because for me, when we're trying to think about education around artificial intelligence, we do need to think about education about our own intelligence, like learning about ourselves, the world around us, and how we're connected to it can actually help us to develop and create AI in the future, how we can actually imagine it in the future, what it might and needs to bring to us. So through the game, as you see that Maja is showing you, we kind of navigated the players through different types of dialogues. But these dialogues, since we were kind of in a very specific time frame with very specific resources, we decided for the game to be kind of like a repository of resources, different kinds of informations for the player to navigate this vast field of what AI is and where AI is actually present in our lives. And for me, this was very important because we tried to also create this information library, like a resource for all types of knowledge groups. And really thinking about education around AI, it's not just about adult education. I mean, when we talk about adult education around AI, it's mostly about those who develop it. And this curriculum at the moment is lacking a lot of very key areas, such as ethical moments, the way about the labor that comes into the work around AI, also the materiality of AI. Somehow we all perceive it as this immaterial cloud thing, but it's actually very, very present. It has a massive infrastructure, and a lot of natural resources are extracted in order for it to be powered. And now there is a lot of talk about, especially in this moment of materiality of technology, around the climate change as well. So we also try to tackle these moments in the game itself. But most important for us was that we did not want really to, through the game, to give a certain kind of ideology. And sometimes in formal education, you do kind of build a certain ideology in education, you know, especially now you're probably been hearing a lot about trying to decolonize the curriculum, which is I think it's very important, especially around AI. We do need to put ourselves in this moment of trying to not think really in terms of Western thinking, but also include other kinds of thinking, other kinds of knowledges. And for us, Ivy was that, because it was intended as an art project. We try to embed a lot of artist way of thinking, include some of the research from the policymakers in it. So basically, you would just navigate the game. You would end up, when you finish the game, you would end up with certain kind of library, which would be kind of your own set of narratives, the way how you perceived it, because you would make decisions, and throughout these decisions you would actually get certain informations. And we were also playing with this, that sometimes we would provide the player with a contrary arguments towards their decision. And because the way when we started to brainstorm about our game, we realized that we all have different points of view on what AI is, or where it should be developed, or what's the future. So we realized that also we can't really say what the future holds for the AI, and we should not put the player in a situation of our own mindset or thinking. We should give them an opportunity to be more informed, to seek information elsewhere. So in that terms, the game is educational for me, because it does not put you in a certain category, what this is and how this should be done. It actually provides you with kind of informations and possibly tools for you to find your own place in it. And right now, the way how in my research I see things, AI has been developed quite a lot about the development comes from companies, mostly like private corporations. Of course, there is a lot coming from the military and government currents. And these definitely embed certain ideologies, certain way of thinking from certain types of cultures. So we do need more ways to disturb this type of thinking. And for me, that's what education around AI should be. If we were to create a curriculum around AI for those future developments, I don't think it should be really just about what is AI, how it functions, but also about its impact, to provide that kind of a different way of how we can think with and around AI. Because arts is kind of always trying to redo it, like appropriate it. Also like policy, people from policy, they have a completely different view on the impacts of AI, especially in terms of human rights. And developers should definitely be aware of that. But it's not also just the developers. You know, we also need to educate the future advocates, future policymakers, those who are going to be in charge of how we're going to actually steer the future development of it.
Thank you for these insights, and you emphasize the importance of transdisciplinary approach to exploring the question of AI. The game Ivy was developed within art science program of the Center for Promotion of Science, and later on I will share you the link in chat, so you can try it out yourself and explore your relationship with artificial intelligence. One important aspect of the game is actually that the player walks around Belgrade, and he or she encounters different institutions, and then have to realize certain task in relation to that location. And I think that actually put emphasis on materiality of AI. We wanted somehow to connect physical space with artificial intelligence. And as you already mentioned, we forget about materiality, and we think only we think about it as in some kind of virtual, non-existing space. I announced that we will talk about informal learning and artificial intelligence. And as I see, this question is related to the use of big data. And we already know that big data and artificial intelligence in digital media are incongruent with fundamental democratic principles and human rights. Some authors frame this in a really interesting way, put it nicely, that tech companies were portrayed as corporate autocracies masquerading as mini democracies. Tremendous amount of digital trace data is collected behind the screens and register information of our behavior, beliefs, preferences in order to profile citizens. And then afterwards, we gain, when we search, when we look for information, that information is tailored according to our previous behavior. What kind of problem do you identify here if all we find is tailored to our previous clicks?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it will be interesting also to ask everyone else here, because I don't know if anyone actually put a stamp around Google at the beginning, because Google is definitely an AI in itself, and it's the one that actually tailors the algorithm around AI, actually tailor our news feed. This is also the Instagram functions and the Facebook. This is the cost of the connection. There is a great book that I recommend definitely reading called Cost of Connections, which is actually explaining this informational and surveillance capitalism behind these technologies that collect a mass amount of data about us. But when it comes how I see this related to informal learning, you mentioned at the beginning about our game. I'm just going to connect to that, that we kind of demanded from the player to walk around the city. We wanted the player also to be in touch with their own bodies as well, because we do distance AI and AI technologies from our body, but they are connected to our body because in a way, our phone is kind of an extension of ourselves, of our mind, and it does shape the way how we enter the world, or how we create community, navigate ourselves, the routes. How many of you, when you visit the city, actually ask people about directions? You ask Google. It does change, it does change our behavior, the way how we socialize. Maybe those are very small aspects, but it's like a butterfly effect. And for me, in this terms of how does this connect to informal learning, for us, this bodily sensation was type of an informal learning, as I perceived it as well. But to come back to the situation of all the tailored and personalized and information media, there are a lot of benefits to it. Also in the game, we try to acknowledge that, but also open up this moment where it actually can be tricky. And it can be tricky when you actually don't have any contrary arguments or contrary facts to what you perceive. So the whole point around today technology, it's a business model to gain for profit making. I don't know if any one of you kind of followed the news about Facebook becoming Meta and the whistleblower actually explaining all the situation, how they actually decided not to really deal with certain issues around their algorithm that was actually like fostering, for example, people with anxiety or depression. They were actually fostering their depression and anxiety, but just providing them with that kind of information, because that's the tailored landscape that we live in. So for me, the way I perceive informal learning is that you are able to seek out different knowledges, different arguments. And if you're not able to do that in this media data landscape, you are actually left with your own filter bubble. And this is not really good. I mean, it can be really good for a certain type of research. You will actually definitely be able to get more information for what you need. but at the same time, you know, it can foster a lot of bad behaviors, bad societal behaviors and societal ideologies. So one way of it is that I find that it's a bit tricky is that we are also not really equipped with skills to search otherwise in this saturated landscape. So I don't know how many of you actually, when you search for information, do you search through different browsers, or do you log in a different email? Or do you maybe try to do VPN or go to Tor, like dark web, that is pretty much unindexed web? So these type of knowledges and skills can actually help us to navigate this and actually be able to use this vast data that we are offered and actually implement it for our informal learning. But in many cases, we are not really aware of this. We don't really question much, you know, we just kind of take technology for granted, like, oh, this is very convenient, great, and we move forward, you know, because that's also how the market around technologies, it's driven like that, to create a desire around us, around our need to use it, even though maybe we don't really need to use it. So somehow we are, the way how I see that the biggest problem is that in order for us to seek informal knowledge in an informal learning environment, we do need to be a bit of aware that there is something going on, that we are actually getting a very specific type of information. So I think it's much harder for us now to be self-aware, like, oh, I think I need different kind of opinions, you know, like maybe this is not really how everything is. And then even if you get to that point, you're a bit lost how you can actually do that, because we live in the post era of fake news, conspiracy theories. It's very, because the internet is very much democratized and it should allow everyone to speak out. It also did create a space where it's very hard to find the reference material, you know, and of course we live in the moment of post-truth. You don't really know who to trust. So how do we actually get the tools to trust? That's for me the biggest problem here. So I think the way maybe to bridge that is to try and find dialogues between people, community around you, and just, you know, try to kind of get outside of our comfort zones, you know, in a way, if I can say that. But these are all just like my points of view. So like Maja said, I'm coming from arts, and since in my studies, I've been introduced the way how Facebook operates, because actually Facebook started when I was still a student. And my professor immediately told us about, okay, see this company, this is how it kind of works. And I was like, I don't want this in my life. And I was resisting the social media for quite a long time. But I know everyone around me didn't. And it was always this stigma, like, why aren't you in the social media world? Like, why not? What's the big deal? And I realized quite early on that people don't really question it much. And I also did not know how to tell them that they should question it. But these are all just my experience and my way of how I think that, and why I think that we need to have more education around AI literacy, data literacy, and algorithmic literacy, and why the informal learning is important. But maybe we can I can actually maybe ask a question. Maybe you don't have to answer if we don't really have time, but I think it will be interesting to see, even if in chat, in keywords, like, how do you think and what do you think the literacy needs to encompass around AI and education? Because I think that education, at least my first knowledge when Maja introduced me to this, I thought of like education about the material that we should offer to people. But it's also about educating the teachers, the professors, and the mentors. Like, they also need to have a criticality towards their material and be like, maybe we should now change this, or like maybe introduce something new to this.
Yes, and we will, you asked the important question, and we will continue to talk about this in breakout rooms. Actually, what you, Alexander, will moderate the group about AI literacy and what actually do we need to learn in order to navigate to this complex AI world. You emphasize how profiling citizens influence on personal well-being. It also influences on our thinking, and we see a lot of polarization and influence on the way we understand world and political situation, and it is very much misused. Misused these last years, and we all know about that problems. Now I would like to conclude this first part of the workshop